The telegram arrived at the agency office in Kansas City, Missouri on a blistering August morning in 1878, and when Mrs. Adelaide Porter read the words scrawled across the yellow paper, she felt her stomach drop like a stone thrown down a well. Bride rejected, sending her back. Do not contact me again. Mrs. Porter set down her teacup and stared at the telegram, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the file on her desk. Tessa Margaret Whitmore, 23 years old, brown hair, green eyes, good education, decent cook, adequate seamstress. This was the second rejection in 8 months. The first had come from a silver miner in Colorado who claimed Tessa was too bookish and not hardy enough for mountain life. Now this homesteader outside Lincoln, Nebraska had sent her back after only 3 days, citing incompatibility without further explanation. 2 rejections were nearly unheard of in the mail-order bride business. Mrs. Porter had been running her agency for 15 years and could count on one hand the number of women who had been returned even once. Twice was a disaster, both for the woman's reputation and for the agency's standing. No respectable man wanted a bride that other men had already found wanting. Tessa arrived back in Kansas City 4 days later, stepping off the train with her single carpet bag and wearing the same brown traveling dress she had departed in. Her face was pale but composed, her shoulders straight despite the weight of shame that must have been pressing down on them. Mrs. Porter met her at the station, searching for words that would not come. "I am sorry," Tessa said quietly as they climbed into the hired carriage. "I know this reflects poorly on your business." "What happened, child?" Mrs. Porter asked, her voice gentler than Tessa had expected. Tessa stared out the carriage window at the dusty streets. "Mr. Henderson was a good man, I think, but he wanted someone who would simply nod and smile and never voice an opinion. When I suggested a more efficient way to organize his root cellar, he became angry. When I asked if I might keep a few books in the house, he told me that reading gave women foolish ideas. On the 3rd morning, he said he had made a mistake and that I should pack my things." Mrs. Porter sighed deeply. She had heard similar stories before, though rarely did they end in outright rejection. Most women simply learned to keep their thoughts to themselves and made do with whatever marriage they had bartered themselves into. "I will not lie to you, Miss Whitmore. Finding you another placement will be extraordinarily difficult. Most men will assume there is something fundamentally wrong with you, even if the fault lay with your previous matches." "I understand," Tessa said, though her voice caught slightly on the words. They rode in silence back to the boarding house where women awaiting placement stayed. Tessa climbed the stairs to her small room and sat on the narrow bed, staring at the bare walls. She had grown up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a school teacher who had died when she was 19. Her mother had passed 2 years later, leaving Tessa alone with debts and no prospects. The mail-order bride agency had seemed like a reasonable solution at the time, a way to start fresh in the vast territories of the West. She had not anticipated that her education and opinions would be viewed as defects rather than assets. 3 weeks passed. Tessa helped Mrs. Porter with paperwork and correspondence, making herself useful while trying not to think about her uncertain future. Then one morning, Mrs. Porter called her into the office with an expression that mixed hope with deep concern. "I have received an inquiry," the older woman said carefully, "from a rancher in Kansas, outside Great Bend to be specific." Great Bend was a small but growing town on the Arkansas River, a cattle shipping point on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. Tessa had heard it was rough country, prone to dust storms and harsh winters. "His name is Zachary Dalton. He is 31 years old and runs a cattle operation on land he homesteaded 7 years ago. He has never been married." Mrs. Porter paused, choosing her words with care. "Mr. Dalton is aware of your previous situations. I felt obligated to inform him, given the circumstances. He has stated that he does not care about such things and is still interested in your placement." Tessa felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, though she tried to suppress it. "Did he say why?" His letter was brief. "He said he needed a wife who could read and write well, as he struggles with both. He said he wanted someone with sense enough to speak their mind when needed. He said he was tired of being alone." Mrs. Porter handed the letter across the desk. "I will be honest with you. This may be your last opportunity. If this placement fails, I cannot in good conscience continue to represent you. The damage to my agency's reputation would be too severe." Tessa took the letter and read it slowly. The handwriting was rough and uneven, the spelling imperfect, but the words themselves were straightforward and lacking in pretense. Zachary Dalton did not promise luxury or romance. He offered partnership and a home, nothing more and nothing less. "I will go," Tessa said. "Are you certain?" "Great Bend is quite remote. The life will be hard." "I am certain. Thank you for giving me this chance, Mrs. Porter." The preparations took a week. Tessa mended her dresses, packed her few belongings, and tried to ignore the pitying looks from the other women in the boarding house. They all knew her story, whispered about it when they thought she could not hear. The girl who had been sent back twice. The girl no man wanted. The train journey to Great Bend took 2 days, with a change in Topeka. Tessa watched the landscape transform outside her window, the settled farmland giving way to rolling prairie, the towns growing smaller and farther between. By the time the train pulled into Great Bend Station on a September afternoon, she felt as though she had traveled to the edge of the world. Great Bend was indeed rough, a collection of wood frame buildings scattered along dusty streets. Cattle pens stretched along the railroad tracks, and the smell of livestock hung heavy in the air. Cowboys and railroad workers filled the saloons, their voices carrying on the wind. Tessa stepped onto the platform with her carpetbag in hand, searching the small crowd for a man she had never met. He stood apart from the others, tall and lean in worn denim and a dusty hat. His face was weathered and tanned, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his eyes a striking pale blue against his sun-darkened skin. He held his hat in his hands when he saw her, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was deep and rough, as though he did not use it often. "Yes, Mr. Dalton," he nodded, his eyes traveling over her face with an expression she could not read. "Welcome to Great Bend. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was fine, thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them. Zachary cleared his throat and reached for her bag. "My wagon is just over here. It is a 2-hour drive to the ranch. We should get started before dark." The wagon was weathered but sturdy, pulled by 2 strong horses. Zachary helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, his hand firm under her elbow. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking softly to the horses. They drove through town and out onto the open prairie. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky was impossibly vast, unmarred by buildings or trees. Tessa had never seen anything like it. "It is very beautiful," she said softly. Zachary glanced at her with surprise. "Most folks find it empty and lonely." "It is both of those things too, but beautiful nonetheless." He fell silent again, but she thought she saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly. They rode without speaking for a long while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the whisper of wind through grass. "I want to be honest with you," Zachary finally said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know you have been sent back twice before. Mrs. Porter told me in her letter. I do not care about that. What I care about is whether you are willing to work hard and whether you will be honest with me. Ranch life is not easy, especially for a woman. There will be times when the work is brutal and the weather is worse. There will be long stretches when we do not see another soul except maybe the ranch hand who works for me. If you are expecting gentility and comfort, you will be disappointed." "I am not expecting gentility," Tessa replied quietly. "I am expecting honesty and respect. If you can offer me those things, I will work as hard as necessary." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she met his gaze steadily. She saw loneliness in his eyes and exhaustion and something else she could not name. Whatever it was, it made her breath catch slightly in her throat. "Then we will deal well together," he said. The ranch came into view as the sun was beginning to set. It was modest, a two-room house built of sod and wood, a barn, a small stable, and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. Smoke rose from the chimney of a smaller building behind the house. "That is where my ranch hand lives," Zachary explained, following her gaze. "His name is Diego Martinez. He has worked for me for 3 years. Good man, keeps to himself mostly." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then reached up to help Tessa descend. His hands were strong and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. He carried her bag to the house and pushed open the door. The interior was clean but sparse. One room served as kitchen and living area, with a table, chairs, a stove, and a few shelves. A door led to what must be the bedroom. Everything was neat and orderly in a way that spoke of a solitary man doing his best. "It is not much," Zachary said, and she heard embarrassment in his voice. "It is honest," Tessa replied. "That is more than some can say." He set her bag down and turned to face her, his expression serious. "There is something we need to discuss. I sent for you intending marriage, and that has not changed, but I will not force you into anything you are not ready for. We can have the ceremony whenever you wish, and the marriage will be whatever you need it to be. If you need time before we share a bed, I will sleep in the barn. I want a partner, Miss Whitmore, not a servant or a captive." Tessa felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since the first rejection. "Thank you for saying that. I think we should marry soon for propriety's sake if nothing else, but I would appreciate time to know you better before we become fully husband and wife." "That seems reasonable." He moved toward the door. "I will sleep in the barn tonight. Tomorrow we can go into town and find a preacher. For tonight, make yourself at home. There is food in the pantry and the water pump is just outside. Mr. Dalton," she called as he reached the door. He turned back to her. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know my situation is unusual. I promise I will do my best to be a good wife to you." His expression softened. "Call me Zachary, and I promise I will do my best to be a good husband. That is all either of us can do." After he left, Tessa stood in the quiet house and let herself breathe. She unpacked her meager belongings, explored the small bedroom with its simple bed and wooden chest, and found the pantry stocked with basics but nothing that spoke of comfort or pleasure. She made a simple meal of beans and bread, more for something to do than from hunger. That night she lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the prairie, the wind and the distant call of coyotes, and wondered what her life would become in this remote place. She thought of Zachary sleeping in the barn when he had every right to claim this bed and her with it. She thought of the careful respect in his voice, the loneliness in his eyes. Perhaps, she told herself, the third time truly could be different. Morning came early. Tessa woke to pale light filtering through the single window and the sound of Zachary moving around outside. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and stepped out to find him at the water pump, washing his face and arms. "Good morning," she said. He straightened, water dripping from his hair. "Morning, I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you. What time would you like to go into town?" "After breakfast, if that suits you. The preacher usually makes his rounds in the morning." Tessa cooked breakfast, eggs and bacon and coffee, and they ate together at the small table. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was weighted with all the things they did not yet know about each other. They took the wagon back into Great Bend, arriving as the town was coming to life. The preacher was a weary-looking man named Reverend Thompson, who agreed to perform the ceremony that very morning. Diego Martinez came in from the ranch to serve as witness, a quiet man in his 40s who shook Tessa's hand solemnly and wished them well. The ceremony was brief and plain. Tessa wore her best dress, a simple gray calico, and Zachary had shaved and put on a clean shirt. They stood in the small church and repeated the words that bound them together for life. And when Zachary kissed her to seal the vows, his lips were gentle and brief against hers. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Tessa felt the weight of it, the finality, but also something that might have been relief. She had chosen this path, made this bargain. Now she would see it through. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Zachary rose before dawn to work the cattle, often riding out for hours at a time. Tessa threw herself into transforming the house into something more like a home. She cleaned thoroughly, organized the pantry, mended curtains, and made new ones from fabric she found in a trunk. She cooked proper meals and learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove. In the afternoons, she helped Zachary with the ranch accounts, recording transactions in the ledger he had been struggling with, writing letters to potential buyers, organizing the chaotic pile of papers that had accumulated. Zachary watched her work with quiet gratitude. He was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke clearly. He brought her wildflowers he found on the prairie. He fixed the window that had been sticking. He asked her opinion on ranch matters and actually listened to her answers. 2 weeks after the wedding, he came in for dinner to find the house transformed. She had hung curtains in the bedroom, spread a colorful quilt on the bed that she had pieced together from fabric scraps, and placed wildflowers in a jar on the table. The smell of roasting chicken filled the air. "This is wonderful," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. That night after dinner, they sat together on the porch and watched the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Zachary sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Can I ask you something?" He said quietly, "Of course." "Why did they really send you back? The first 2 men. Mrs. Porter told me the basics, but I want to hear it from you." Tessa was silent for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "The first man, the miner in Colorado, he wanted someone who would simply exist in his house and ask nothing of him. When I tried to have actual conversations, when I expressed interest in his work or opinions about the world, he became uncomfortable. He told the agency I was not suited for mountain life, but the truth was he was not suited for having a real person as a wife. He wanted a doll, not a partner. And the second was worse in a way. He was not cruel, but he was afraid of me. Afraid of my education, afraid that I might somehow diminish him by knowing things he did not. When I tried to help him, he saw it as criticism. When I spoke, he heard judgment. In the end, he could not bear to have a wife who might be smarter than him, even though I never said or did anything to suggest I thought I was." Zachary was quiet, processing this. "I need to tell you something," he finally said. "I can barely read. I never went to school much as a child. We were too poor, and I was needed to work. I can sign my name and puzzle out simple words, but anything more complicated than that is beyond me. That is why I need help with the accounts and the letters. Some men might be ashamed to admit that to their wife, but I figure honesty is more important than pride. Tessa turned to look at him, and she saw vulnerability in his face that made her heart ache. I do not think less of you for that. Many people do not have the opportunity for education. It does not reflect on your intelligence or your worth. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is truth. She hesitated, then reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. I am grateful to be here, Zachary. Grateful that you were willing to take a chance on me. I know I am considered damaged goods in the eyes of most. His hand turned under hers, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. You are not damaged. You were just matched with the wrong men. Men who were too small to appreciate what they had. They sat like that as the stars emerged overhead, hands linked, and Tessa felt something shift between them. Trust, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. The next morning, Zachary came in from the barn earlier than usual to find Tessa at the stove making breakfast. He moved up behind her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Would it be all right if I kissed you?" he asked, his voice low. "A real kiss, I mean. Not like in the church." She turned to face him, her heart beating faster. "Yes." He cupped her face in his hands, calloused palms gentle against her cheeks, and lowered his mouth to hers. This kiss was nothing like the brief press of lips at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of longing and careful passion. Tessa's hands came up to grip his shirt, and she kissed him back with equal hunger. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day you arrived," he admitted. "Why did you wait? I wanted you to be sure, wanted you to want me, not just tolerate me because you had no other choice." "I want you," she said softly, "but I am still afraid of disappointing you. Afraid that you will find something wrong with me like the others did." "There is nothing wrong with you, Tessa, and I will spend every day proving that to you if I have to." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also patience. "We do not have to rush," he said. "When you are ready, you will tell me. Until then, I am content to court my own wife," and court her he did. In the weeks that followed, Zachary showed Tessa a tenderness she had not known existed. He brought her small gifts from town, ribbons and hard candy. He took her riding across the prairie, showing her the land he loved. He told her stories of his childhood, his struggles to build the ranch, his dreams for the future. In turn, she told him about Philadelphia, about her parents, about the books she loved and the education she had received. They worked together during the day, she helping with ranch tasks when needed, he helping her with heavier household work. In the evenings they sat together, and Tessa began teaching Zachary to read better, using old newspapers and the Bible as texts. He was a quick study when he had a patient teacher, and his pride in his progress was touching to witness. One night, nearly 6 weeks after their wedding, Tessa woke in the dark to the sound of raised voices outside. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Zachary had been sleeping in the bedroom for the past 2 weeks, though they had not yet consummated the marriage, and his side of the bed was empty. She grabbed a shawl and hurried to the window. In the moonlight, she could see several figures on horseback near the barn. Zachary stood in front of the barn door, his rifle in his hands, facing them down. Diego emerged from his quarters, also armed. Tessa could not hear the words, but the tension was clear. The riders sat their horses for what felt like an eternity, then finally turned and rode off into the darkness. Zachary and Diego stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. When Zachary came back inside, Tessa was waiting by the door. "What was that about?" she demanded, fear making her voice sharp. He set the rifle down carefully. "Cattle rustlers, most likely. They have been working this area for months. They were probably scouting the herd, seeing how many head we have and how well defended we are. Will they come back? Probably. But they saw we are armed and ready. That will make them think twice." He moved closer to her, his expression concerned. "I am sorry you were frightened. I did not want you to have to deal with this kind of thing. I am not some fragile flower, Zachary. I can handle difficult things, but I need you to be honest with me about the dangers we face. You are right. I am sorry." He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She could feel his heart beating hard against her cheek. "The truth is, ranching out here is dangerous. Rustlers, harsh weather, disease in the herd, injury. Any of those things could destroy us. I do the best I can to protect what we have, but I am just one man." "Two men," Tessa corrected. "Diego is loyal to you. 2 men against how many rustlers?" He sighed. "I am not trying to frighten you more, just being honest like you asked." Tessa pulled back slightly to look up at him. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes. That is what marriage means, is it not?" He searched her face in the dim light, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it has not been long, and I know you might not feel the same way yet, but I needed to tell you. You are everything I hoped for and more than I deserve." Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes. "You deserve everything good in this world, Zachary Dalton, and I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since the day you said you would sleep in the barn to give me time." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, his hands tangling in her hair. Tessa kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, all the fear and hope and growing love. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered against his lips. "Really stay with me. I am ready." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. I want to be your wife in every way." He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, laying her gently on the bed they had been sharing so chastely. In the darkness, with only moonlight filtering through the window, they came together as husband and wife. Zachary was gentle and patient, making sure of her comfort, and Tessa gave herself to him without reservation. There was awkwardness and uncertainty, as there always is the first time, but there was also tenderness and genuine connection. Afterward they lay tangled together, Tessa's head on Zachary's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None. You, not a single one." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Third time is forever, Tessa, I promise you that." She smiled against his skin. Forever sounds just right. The weeks turned into months. Fall gave way to winter, and the prairie transformed under snow and ice. The work was hard, just as Zachary had warned. There were mornings when Tessa woke to frozen water and struggled to get the stove going in the bitter cold. There were days when Zachary came in from checking the herd half frozen, his face raw from windburn. But there were also quiet evenings by the fire, Zachary's head in her lap as she read aloud from books ordered from a catalog. There were Sunday mornings wrapped in blankets together. There were shared jokes and growing intimacy. In January, a blizzard struck with such ferocity that Zachary and Diego had to string rope between the house and barn to keep from getting lost in the whiteout. For 3 days, the world was nothing but howling wind and driving snow. Tessa kept the fire going and the food hot, while Zachary ventured out repeatedly to check on the livestock. On the 3rd night, he came in so cold he could barely speak. Tessa stripped off his frozen clothes and wrapped him in blankets, holding him close until his shivering subsided. "I thought I was going to lose some cattle," he said through chattering teeth. "But they huddled together in the ravine like I taught them, smart creatures." "Not as smart as you," Tessa said, rubbing his arms to restore circulation. "Coming back before you froze to death. I had to come back. I have a wife waiting for me now." When spring finally arrived, it came with dramatic suddenness. The snow melted into rushing streams, wildflowers erupted across the prairie, and the cattle began dropping calves. It was a busy, chaotic time, but also beautiful. Tessa helped where she could, learning to bottle feed a calf whose mother had died, helping to mend fences damaged by winter ice. One morning in April, she woke feeling sick to her stomach. The feeling persisted for several days before she finally admitted to herself what it might mean. When she told Zachary her suspicion, his face transformed with joy. "A baby," he repeated as though he could not quite believe it. "You are sure?" "Fairly sure. It is still early, but the signs are there." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight. "We are going to be parents. I am going to be a father." "You will be a wonderful father," Tessa said, touched by his uncomplicated happiness. The pregnancy was not easy. Summer heat made Tessa nauseous and exhausted. But Zachary was attentive and supportive, taking on extra household tasks without complaint, bringing her water and fanning her when the heat became oppressive. Diego, upon learning the news, began leaving small carved toys on the porch, his way of expressing congratulations. In late summer, a letter arrived from Mrs. Porter's agency. Tessa opened it with some trepidation, wondering why the older woman would write after so many months. The contents surprised her. "She wants to know how we are doing," Tessa told Zachary. "She says she has been thinking of me and hoping the placement worked out well." "Write back to her," Zachary suggested. "Tell her the truth. Tell her you are happy." Tessa did write back, a long letter describing her life on the ranch, her growing love for Zachary, the baby on the way. She tried to convey that this life, while hard, was good and real and hers in a way nothing had been before. She thanked Mrs. Porter for not giving up on her after 2 failures. The reply came weeks later. Mrs. Porter wrote that she was pleased beyond words, that Tessa's happiness justified all the risks she had taken in sending her to Zachary. She also included a confession. Zachary had been far more insistent than she had let on. He had written 3 letters pleading for the chance to meet Tessa, promising he would treat her well, all but begging Mrs. Porter to trust him. It was his persistence, combined with the obvious sincerity in his poorly spelled words, that had convinced Mrs. Porter to make the match despite the risks. "You wrote her 3 times. Tessa asked Zachary that evening, holding the letter. He looked embarrassed. "I did. When she wrote back saying you had been rejected twice and would be difficult to place, something about it just felt right to me. I could not explain it. I just knew I needed to convince her to send you here. You were that certain, sight unseen, not certain exactly, just hopeful. I had been alone for a long time, Tessa. Years of coming back to an empty house, of eating meals in silence, of having no one to talk to except Diego and the cattle. When I read that you were educated and had opinions and had been rejected for those things, I thought, that is exactly the kind of woman I need. Someone with a mind of her own. Someone who will not just fade into the background." Tessa set the letter aside and moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I am so grateful you were persistent. I cannot imagine my life without you now." He kissed her slowly, his hands resting gently on the swell of her belly. "Neither can I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." In October, as the leaves were turning and the air growing crisp, Tessa went into labor. The nearest doctor was in Great Bend, and Zachary rode like fury to fetch him while Diego stayed with Tessa. By the time they returned, she was well into active labor, gripping Diego's hand and breathing through the pain. The birth was long and difficult. The doctor, a competent if gruff man named Dr. Sullivan, coached Tessa through hours of labor while Zachary paced outside, refusing to leave even when Diego suggested he go check the cattle. Finally, as dawn was breaking, the sound of a baby's cry pierced the air. Zachary burst through the door to find Tessa exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "A son," Dr. Sullivan announced. "A healthy boy. Congratulations." Zachary approached the bed slowly as though in a dream. He looked down at the tiny baby in Tessa's arms, at the small face and waving fists, and tears began rolling down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas after Tessa's father. Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with powerful lungs. Those first weeks were exhausting, a blur of feedings and diaper changes and very little sleep. But there were also moments of transcendent joy, watching Zachary hold his son with infinite tenderness, seeing the fierce love in his eyes. The winter of 1879 was milder than the previous year, which was fortunate given that they now had an infant to care for. Tessa marveled at how easily Zachary adapted to fatherhood. He would walk the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night, singing off-key cowboy songs in his deep voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving designs into the wood. He was patient with the interrupted sleep and the constant demands of a newborn. "I never knew I could love anyone this much," he told Tessa one night as they watched Thomas sleep. "Not until you came, and now there are two people I would die for without hesitation." "Let us hope it never comes to that," Tessa said, leaning against him. "I much prefer you alive and here with us." As Thomas grew, the ranch prospered. Zachary's hard work and careful management paid off in a growing herd and steady income. They were able to hire another ranch hand, a young man named Sam who was eager to learn the business. Tessa continued to manage the accounts and correspondence, her organizational skills proving invaluable. In the summer of 1880, when Thomas was nearly a year old, they made a trip to Kansas City to visit Mrs. Porter. The older woman was delighted to meet the family, exclaiming over Thomas and embracing Tessa warmly. "I knew you two were right for each other," she said with satisfaction. "Something about Mr. Dalton's letters told me he would appreciate you properly." They stayed in Kansas City for a week, Tessa showing Zachary the city she had grown up in, introducing him to the few friends she still had there. But by the end of the week, they were both eager to return home. The ranch and the prairie had claimed them, become part of who they were. The years that followed were good ones. There were challenges, of course. Drought in 1881 that had them worried for the cattle. A close call with rustlers in 1882 that resulted in Zachary taking a bullet to the shoulder, though thankfully it was not serious. The normal struggles of running a ranch and raising a family in remote territory, but there were far more joys than sorrows. A daughter born in 1882, whom they named Alina after Zachary's mother. Another son in 1884 named James. Watching Thomas take his first steps, say his first words, learn to ride a pony. Watching the ranch grow and thrive. Quiet evenings with the children asleep and Zachary reading aloud, his skills having improved remarkably over the years. Sunday picnics by the river. Community gatherings in Great Bend where Tessa made friends among the other ranch wives. In 1885, on their 7th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Tessa with a trip to Topeka. They left the children with Diego's wife, Maria, who had joined them on the ranch 2 years prior, and spent 3 days in the capital city. It was the first time they had been alone together since Thomas's birth. On their last evening, as they walked along the Kansas River, Zachary pulled Tessa close. "You remember what I told you that first night?" he asked. "After the rustlers came, you told me you were falling in love with me. And I said third time is forever." He stopped walking and turned her to face him. "I meant it then, but I did not fully understand what forever could mean. Now I do. Forever is watching you rock our children to sleep. Forever is your hand in mine at the end of a long day. Forever is building something real and lasting together. Forever is waking up beside you every morning and still feeling grateful that you are mine." Tessa felt tears pricking her eyes. "I love you so much, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone. You saw value in me when others saw only flaws. The flaws were in them, not you. You were always perfect. You just needed someone with sense enough to see it." They kissed there by the river as the sun set. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful in the harsh prairie country. When they returned to the ranch, Thomas, now 6 years old, came running to greet them. Eleanor toddled after him on chubby legs, and little James was in Maria's arms. Zachary scooped up both older children while Tessa took the baby, and they walked into the house together, a complete family. That night, after the children were asleep, Tessa and Zachary sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful under the stars. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked. "Giving up city life for this?" "Never. Not for one moment. This is where I was meant to be. With you. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was all a dream," he admitted. "That you are not really here, that the children are not real. It seems impossible that I could be this happy." "It is not impossible. It is just what happens when two people choose each other and commit to making it work." She laced her fingers through his. "We are real, Zachary. This life is real, and it is ours." He kissed her hand, then pulled her close. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie night, content in the life they had built together. More years passed, each one adding to the story of their life together. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Thomas grew into a responsible boy who loved working with his father. Eleanor was bright and curious, always asking questions and demanding to be taught everything her brothers learned. James was the gentlest of the three, with a gift for handling animals. In 1887, when Tessa was 32 and Zachary was 40, they learned they were expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, perhaps because Tessa was older, perhaps simply because she was chasing after 3 active children. Zachary insisted she rest more, taking on even more of the household work. The baby, another daughter they named Rose, arrived healthy and strong in early 1888. She had Zachary's blue eyes and Tessa's dark hair, and her siblings were instantly smitten with her. That same year brought significant changes to Great Bend. The town was growing rapidly, attracting more settlers, more businesses. The wild lawlessness of earlier days was giving way to something more settled and civilized. Zachary and Tessa found themselves respected members of the community, their success story told as an example of what was possible in Kansas. One day in the spring of 1889, a young woman arrived at the ranch in a hired wagon. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with a carpetbag clutched in her hands and an expression of desperate hope on her face. "Mrs. Dalton?" she asked when Tessa answered the door. "My name is Sarah Miller. Mrs. Porter from Kansas City gave me your name. She said you might be willing to talk to me." Tessa recognized the look on the young woman's face, the mixture of shame and determination. "Come in, please. "You look exhausted." Over tea, Sarah told her story. She had been a mail-order bride sent to a rancher in Colorado. The man had been cruel, far worse than the matches Tessa had endured. Sarah had endured 2 weeks of verbal abuse before gathering the courage to leave in the middle of the night, walking 10 miles to the nearest town. Now she was returned and marked as a failed bride, just as Tessa had been all those years ago. "Mrs. Porter said you were sent back twice before you found your husband," Sarah said quietly. "She thought maybe you would understand what I am going through, that you might have advice." Tessa reached across the table and took the young woman's hand. "I understand completely, and my advice is this: you did nothing wrong. The man who hurt you, he is the failure, not you. Do not let anyone make you believe otherwise. But who will want me now? I am spoiled goods." "That is what I thought too. But then I met my husband and he did not care about my past. He only cared about who I was and what kind of future we could build together." Tessa paused. "Are you willing to try again, to take another chance?" "I do not know if I can bear another rejection." "Then maybe rejection is not what you need. Maybe what you need is to choose for yourself this time." Zachary came in then, dusty from the range, and Tessa introduced him to Sarah. She saw the young woman's fear, the way she unconsciously shrank back from the tall male figure. But Zachary, with his quiet gentleness, soon put her at ease. That evening, after Sarah had gone to sleep in the spare room they had added to the house over the years, Tessa and Zachary discussed the situation. "She needs time to heal," Tessa said, "and she needs to know that not all men are cruel. I was thinking we could offer her work here as a teacher for the children. She is educated and I could use the help. It would give her a safe place to recover while earning her own money." "That is a fine idea," Zachary agreed. "And who knows, maybe in time she will be ready to try again. Or maybe she will choose to remain independent. Either way, she deserves support, not judgment." Sarah stayed with them through the summer, teaching Thomas, Elena, and James their letters and numbers and helping Tessa with household work. Slowly, her fear began to fade, replaced by cautious confidence. She laughed at Zachary's terrible jokes, helped Diego's wife Maria with the garden, and played with baby Rose. In August, Sam, the young ranch hand, began finding excuses to be around the house more often. He was 24, hardworking and kind, with none of the cruelty or arrogance that had marked Sarah's previous match. At first, Sarah was wary, but Sam was patient. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, and never pushed for more than she was willing to give. By September, they were courting. By December, they were married in a small ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by the family that had become Sarah's refuge and Sam's employer. Zachary helped Sam homestead a parcel of land adjacent to the ranch, and the young couple began building their own life. "You gave her hope," Zachary told Tessa as they watched Sarah and Sam drive away after the wedding. "The same way Mrs. Porter gave you hope. That is a rare gift." "You are the one who gave me hope," Tessa corrected. "I was just passing it along." Word spread about what Tessa and Zachary had done for Sarah. Over the next few years, other women in difficult situations found their way to the ranch. Not all of them were former mail-order brides, but all of them needed a place to recover and regroup. Tessa and Zachary helped where they could, offering work or shelter or simply a sympathetic ear. Some of the women moved on, some found love as Sarah had, some chose independence. All of them left stronger than they had arrived. By 1895, Thomas was 16 and working the ranch full-time alongside his father. Elena was 13 and already talking about attending normal school to become a teacher. James was 11 and had a special gift with horses. Rose, at 7, was the light of everyone's life, charming and mischievous in equal measure. The ranch was thriving beyond Zachary's wildest dreams. They now ran over 1,000 head of cattle and employed 6 ranch hands. The house had been expanded twice and was now a proper 2-story home with a parlor and a formal dining room. They were not wealthy by the standards of big city folk, but they were comfortable and respected. One evening that fall, Zachary and Tessa sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sunset. It had been 17 years since Tessa had stepped off the train in Great Bend, scared and hopeful and determined not to fail again. "You remember that first night?" Zachary asked, echoing her thoughts. "When I told you the ranch was not much, I remember. I remember thinking that it was honest and that was enough. It was not enough, not nearly. You deserved so much more than I could give you then. You gave me everything that mattered. Love, respect, partnership, a home and a family. What more could anyone want?" Zachary pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "Mrs. Porter wrote to me, you know, before I ever wrote to her. She sent out general inquiries to established ranchers, asking if anyone was looking for a bride. Most men ignored it or wrote back asking for young, beautiful, docile women. I wrote back asking for someone intelligent and strong. She said later that my letter stood out because I seemed to actually want a person, not an ideal. I never knew that. I never told you, but it is true. From the beginning, all I wanted was someone real, someone I could talk to and work with and build a life with. I got all that and so much more." Tessa leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the way that came from years of companionship. "Third time truly was forever." "Forever and beyond," he agreed. In 1898, Thomas married a local girl named Catherine, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread. The wedding was a grand affair by Great Bend standards, with over 100 guests. Zachary gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying, talking about love and persistence, and taking chances on people. Thomas and Catherine built a house on ranch land, and Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Zachary to slow down slightly. At 51, Zachary was still strong and capable, but he was no longer a young man. He appreciated being able to spend more time with his younger children and his wife. Eleanor did indeed go to normal school, graduating in 1900 and returning to Great Bend to teach at the growing school. She boarded in town during the week, but came home every weekend, filling the house with stories of her students. James, at 17, was still undecided about his future. He loved the ranch but also felt called to something else. When he announced in early 1901 that he wanted to study veterinary medicine, Zachary and Tessa supported him wholeheartedly, even though it meant sending him to Kansas City for training. Rose, at 13, was the last child still at home full-time. She was bright and loving, with her father's eyes and her mother's quick mind. She helped her mother with the continued work of supporting women in need, showing a natural compassion that made Tessa proud. In the summer of 1903, Mrs. Porter made a trip to Kansas to visit. She was now 72 years old, white-haired and moving slowly, but still sharp as ever. She stayed at the ranch for 2 weeks, marveling at what Tessa and Zachary had built. "You know," she said one evening as they all sat on the porch, "in all my years running the agency, I placed hundreds of women. But your story is the one I am most proud of. Not because it ended happily, though that certainly matters, but because it showed me that sometimes the matches that seem least likely are actually the most perfect." "You took a significant risk on me," Tessa said. "After 2 failures, most people would have given up." "I took a risk on both of you," Mrs. Porter corrected. "On you to try again after heartbreak, and on Mr. Dalton to see past what society deemed a flaw. Thank goodness you both proved me right." Zachary reached over and took Tessa's hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You gave me everything when you sent Tessa to Great Bend." The years continued to roll by, marked by the normal milestones of life. Grandchildren began arriving, first Thomas and Catherine's son in 1900, then their daughter in 1902. Eleanor married a doctor from Topeka in 1904 and moved to the capital, though she visited often. James finished his veterinary training and opened a practice in Great Bend, becoming the first veterinarian in the area. Rose, bucking all expectations, decided not to marry but instead to continue the work of helping displaced women, eventually opening a proper refuge house in Great Bend with Tessa's financial support and guidance. In 1908, Zachary and Tessa celebrated their 30th anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted all weekend. There were speeches and laughter, stories told and retold, music and dancing and abundant food. On Sunday evening, after everyone had left, Zachary and Tessa walked down to the river that ran through their land. The prairie was golden in the late summer light, just as it had been that first day Zachary had driven her from town. 30 years, Tessa said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that train, terrified that I was about to fail for the third time. And sometimes it feels like we have been together forever, like there was never a time when we were not us, Zachary added. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that, watching the water flow past, comfortable in the silence. "You know what I think about most?" Tessa asked after a while. "I think about all the little moments that brought us to this point. The first time you brought me wildflowers. The night you told me you were falling in love with me. Holding Thomas for the first time. Watching you teach the children to ride. Every quiet evening on the porch. Those moments, strung together, make up this beautiful life we have built. I think about the courage it took for you to step off that train," Zachary said. "After being rejected twice, you still found the strength to try again. That kind of bravery awes me. It always has." "It was not bravery. It was desperation mixed with a tiny seed of hope. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." They walked back to the house as twilight fell, hand in hand as they had walked so many times before. The house glowed with lamplight, welcoming them home. More years passed. Zachary's hair turned fully white, and his movements became slower, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Tessa never dimmed. Tessa developed arthritis in her hands, making it harder to do the fine needlework she had once enjoyed, but she found other ways to stay occupied. They became the patriarch and matriarch of not just their own family, but of the entire community, respected for their wisdom and their enduring love story. In 1915, as war raged in Europe though America had not yet entered the conflict, Zachary fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia. Despite James's best efforts and the care of the entire family, Zachary weakened steadily. In early December, as snow began to fall outside, Zachary called Tessa to his bedside. At 68 years old, he looked every one of his years, weathered and worn. But when he looked at his wife, his eyes were the same piercing blue they had always been, full of love. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice weak. "Save your strength," Tessa urged, though tears were already streaming down her face. She had known for days that he was leaving her. "No, I need to say this while I can. You made my life worth living, Tessa. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought joy and purpose and love. You gave me children and grandchildren and a family I never dreamed I would have. These 37 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life." "Do not talk like you are saying goodbye," Tessa begged, even though she knew it was exactly what he was doing. "Third time is forever, remember? We got our forever. Not as long as I wanted, never long enough, but we got it, and it was perfect." His hand, so weak now, reached for hers. "Promise me you will not stop living after I am gone. Promise me you will keep helping those women who need it, keep loving our family, keep living the life we built together." "I promise," she whispered through her tears, "but I do not know how to do any of those things without you. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You will find a way." He managed a small smile. "Besides, I will still be with you. Every sunset on the prairie, every wildflower in spring, every calf born on this ranch. I will be there." Zachary Dalton passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by his wife and children. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend, he chose love." The months after Zachary's death were the hardest of Tessa's life. The grief was overwhelming at times, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But she kept her promise. She continued the work with displaced women, now under Rose's capable management. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, finding joy in their accomplishments and their love. She walked the ranch every day, seeing Zachary in every familiar corner. And slowly, though the grief never fully left, it became something she could carry. She found she could remember their life together with more joy than pain, could smile at the memories instead of only crying. One spring morning in 1920, 65-year-old Tessa stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land Zachary had loved so much. The prairie was green and new, wildflowers blooming in riotous colors. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. In the yard, her great-grandchildren played, their laughter carrying on the wind. Thomas approached, now a grandfather himself at 45. "Mother, are you all right?" She smiled at him, this son who looked so much like his father. "I am more than all right. I was just thinking how blessed I have been, how blessed we all have been. Because of you and Father, you built something lasting here, not just the ranch, but a family, a legacy of love and acceptance." "Your father built it," Tessa corrected gently. "I was just fortunate enough to be invited along." "No, Mother, you built it together. That is what made it strong." That night, Tessa sat on the porch alone, something she did often now. She looked up at the stars and spoke quietly to the man she had loved for 37 years. "You were right, my love. Forever was possible. We got our forever and it was perfect. And the best part is that it is not really over. Our forever lives on in our children and their children. It lives on in every woman who finds refuge and hope because of what we started. It lives on in this ranch and this land and this life we built from nothing." A breeze stirred her hair, warm and gentle, and Tessa smiled. She could almost feel Zachary beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his voice saying what he had said so long ago. Third time is forever. She had been sent back twice before, rejected and deemed unworthy. But Zachary had seen her true worth. He had said the third time would be forever, and he had been absolutely right. Their love had lasted through 37 years of marriage and continued even beyond death. It had created a family, built a legacy, and changed lives. Tessa lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1928 at the age of 73. She was buried beside Zachary on the hill overlooking the ranch, her headstone reading, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend." She chose courage. The ranch continued under Thomas's management, then eventually passed to his son. The refuge house Rose had founded continued operating for decades, helping hundreds of women find their footing in difficult times. The story of Zachary and Tessa became local legend, told and retold as an example of what was possible when two people chose to see the best in each other. because in the end, that was what mattered. Not that Tessa had been rejected twice before. Not that Zachary had been a lonesome cowboy desperate for companionship. What mattered was that they had found each other, had chosen each other, and had built something beautiful together. Third time had indeed been forever, a forever that echoed through generations and touched countless lives. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on that land today, still running cattle on the Kansas prairie, still telling the story of the mail-order bride who was sent back twice before, and the lonesome cowboy who said third times forever, and meant it with every fiber of his being. It is a story of courage and second chances, of love that endures, of building something lasting from the most unlikely beginning. And somewhere, in the wind that whispers across the prairie grass and in the stars that shine over Great Bend, Kansas, two souls continue their forever, together as they always were meant to be.